Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 104th anniversary of the Battle of Lone Pine. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Sergeant Shane Doherty. Shane is the great nephew of Private Bruce Archer, tonight's Roll of Honour story. We warmly welcome the family of Private Bruce Charles Curtis Archer, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Mr John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, St Matthew's Catholic School, Mudgee. From the Northern Territory, Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, Thummerup Catholic College, Wadeye. And from Queensland, Pacific Pines State School, St Joseph's School, Claremont, and St Bridget's Catholic Primary School, Emerald. And from Western Australia, Court Grammar School, Mungijong. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier within the Hall of Memory. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Party, attention! Catapult Party, present arms.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is earth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult Party, shoulder arms. Catapult Party, order arms.
Students, you may be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to address you.
We pause here today in the heart of the land they loved. 104 years after one of the most significant days in Australia's history, and certainly one of the most significant battles ever fought by the Australian Army, and that is the commencement of the Battle of Lone Pine at Gallipoli on the 6th of August 1915. There'd been a stalemate at Gallipoli over 3 months since the landing, and in August a series of coordinated attacks had been carefully planned. The New Zealanders would assault Chanock Bear, their finest and most tragic moments at Gallipoli. The dismounted light horse would attack in the northern part of the Anzac sector at 4:30 a.m. on the 7th of August, and the Australians would undertake a frontal assault of the Turkish trenches at Lone Pine at 4:30 in the afternoon of the 6th of August. The Australians would run across open ground, about 100 metres, to the Turkish trenches. Unbeknownst to the Australians, the Turks had not only dug and reinforced their trenches with thick pine logs, they'd also built a complex array of galleries and tunnels, and over the top of those pine logs, very thick layers of soil. So the Australians would, having got to the Turkish lines, then physically have to fight to find their way in and undertake the battle. It was 4 days of subterranean anarchy. The fighting and the dying was with bombs, grenades, bayonets, pistols, teeth, clubs, and at its end would be 7,000 Turkish casualties, 2,200 Australian casualties, and 7 Australians would be awarded the Victoria Cross for valour. At the end of the battle, Sergeant Lawrence, the Australian tunnelling engineer, stood on the captured Turkish trenches and looked back across no man's land to the lines from which Australians had come. And he said, all the way across is just one mass of dead bodies. Beside me I count 14 of our boys, stone dead. Men and boys who yesterday were full of joy and life, now lying there dead. Glassy eyes, sallow dusty faces, soulless, somebody's son, somebody's boy. The Major standing next to me, he says, well, we have one. One, my God, he said. That means a victory. May I never see a defeat. Private Mark Smith went forward in that attack 104 years ago today with his brother Benjamin. He spent 3 days looking for his brother after the battle. Couldn't find him. Took a pine cone off one of the Turkish logs on their trenches, sent it back to his mother in Inverell. She grew 3 young saplings, lone pines from that pine cone, sent one of them to the Yarralumla nursery in Canberra in 1929, and in 1934 it was planted on the grounds of the memorial, now the magnificent lone pine tree, which graces our grounds out on the western side. Charles Bean, the official First World War correspondent and historian who observed all of this, recorded something that reveals much of our character as Australians and why this is so important to us, whether Australians by birth or by choice. Just before the attack, with all the men silent, ready for the assault, an Australian went to the very forward trench and he leaned over it and he said to the men in it, "Is Jim here?" And a voice came back from the fire step, "Yeah, right here, Bill." "Do you blokes mind moving up a piece?" asked the first voice. "Him and me are mates, and we're going over together." And therein lies the value behind all of this, that in the end, what we need most is one another. We are Australians.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway lands. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Bruce Charles Curtis Archer. Bruce Archer was born in 1895 in Singleton, New South Wales, the eldest child of Emily Elizabeth Archer. Young Bruce grew up in the Murrurundi area and attended a local public school. He later worked as a baker and gained valuable military service by serving in a local volunteer cadets program. Bruce Archer enlisted in the Australian Infantry Force in Sydney on the 31st of August 1914, just weeks after the beginning of the war. Like many young men at the time, Archer was keen to serve Australia in what he thought would be a great adventure, and lied about his age in order to serve. He listed his age at enlistment as 20 years and 10 months old, when in fact he was only 18. Archer joined the newly formed 3rd Infantry Battalion, which formed part of the 1st Brigade of the 1st Australian Division. 6 weeks after enlisting, Archer sailed with his unit aboard the transport ship Euphrates from Sydney to Albany in Western Australia, and then to Egypt. Once there, they continued their training at the Mina camp outside of Cairo. In early April 1915, Archer sailed from Alexandria for Lemnos, and after a brief period of training, set sail once again, this time for Gallipoli. Archer and the 3rd Battalion were among the first and second waves of Australian troops to land on Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. They began their landing shortly at 5:30 a.m. and were fully ashore 2.5 hours later. The field diary of the 3rd Battalion records that, in the face of heavy fire, the division landed, the enemy being strongly entrenched on the steep hillside. Soon after landing, the 3rd Australian formed part of the right flank of Australian troops that successfully took and then held a series of Turkish trenches near the landing beaches. Throughout the night and into the 26th of April, Turkish forces kept up the battle and made a series of counterattacks, but were unable to dislodge the Australian forces. Archer and the 3rd Battalion remained on Gallipoli for the bloody weeks that followed. In early August 1915, they moved into position to prepare for what would become known as the Battle of Lone Pine. The attack at Lone Pine was designed as a diversion to attract Turkish fire from a larger attack further to the north at Hill 971. The battle began after a 3-day-long bombardment of the Turkish lines that intensified for its final hour. At 5:30 p.m. on the 6th of August, Archer and the Australian troops jumped out of their trenches and attacked the Turkish positions. They successfully reached the first line of trenches, but found that they had been covered by protective wooden logs. While some of the troops attempted to remove the logs and attack the Turkish forces underneath, the majority of the men then continued their attack towards a series of communication trenches further behind the lines. These trenches were successfully taken, though held with great difficulty. Fighting raged for 3 days, and by the time it had subsided, the Australian 1st and 3rd Brigades had lost over 2,200 casualties. In the chaos and confusion of the battle, Archer was originally reported missing, and it was not until June 1916, nearly a year after his death, that he was officially declared to have been killed in action. One report states that he was last seen in the initial charge on the Turkish lines on the 6th of August, killed by shell fire as he neared the enemy trench. The official record states that he was killed in action on the 7th of August, likely while making an attack on a short stretch of Turkish trenches as the Australian troops sought to consolidate their positions. His body was never found. He was only 19. His name is listed on the honour roll to my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service of sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Bruce Charles Curtis Archer, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
For party, shoulder, arms.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Counterfoil Party, present arms. Counterfoil Party, shoulder arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Counterfoil Party in words. Turn. Counterfoil Party, quick march.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys and students, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.